don't get me wrong. I don't mean to criticize what you're saying, but I want to be as thorough as possible. South Africa is one of the most dangerous places on earth. It's one of the rape and murder capitals of the world. What makes the plight of white people there different than just the general population?
That's a very, very good question, Faith, and it's the first time that somebody's asked me that question since I've been touring the USA now for almost 5 months. It is true that crime and violence is endemic throughout South Africa. It is true that black people kill black people at rates that North Americans simply wouldn't understand. However, it is equally true to say that there's an inordinate rape and murder rate of white people by black people that permits us as a group to say, hey, okay, it's well and good that within your own communities there are these astonishing levels of crime, but we would prefer not to be exposed to those levels of crime, and we would specifically prefer not to be exposed to even higher levels of crime.
Now, as I understand it, the police force in South Africa is not exactly the most trustworthy agency, let's say, that your government officials largely hire private contractors for security. Can you just speak to the governmental and the police response to the plight of white people in South Africa right now?
It's healthy to view it in a broader context. There's been a severe decline of our state since the 27th of April 1994, when Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress assumed the reins of power in South Africa. Our schooling system has deteriorated to make it unrecognizable by comparison with the past. Our health system is in absolute tatters, and so the list goes on, the administration and what have you. The police are part of that picture. Our police service has deteriorated something just abysmal, and it's reached the point where the police cannot protect the citizens of South Africa from crime. Indeed, the Minister of the Police, Minister of Safety and Security is the correct title, stated in Parliament in 2007, if white people don't like the rates of crime in South Africa, they should leave. The government is very overtly unwilling to do what it takes to repair the problem, and Dr. Gregory Stanton of Genocide Watch of Washington, D.C., the world's foremost genocide expert, said that what concerns him the most is not just these incredible rates of rape and murder of white people in South Africa, but that it appears as if the government has a hidden hand in it, as if there's some sort of encouragement or tacit tolerance of it, that the government is happy for this thing to be going on.
Hey, that was a clip from my show. To watch the whole show, log on to therebel.media and subscribe.
Having been born and raised in a post-apartheid country, to some extent gives me insight, very specific insight into the kind of revenge narratives. You know, when you study post-Civil War Reconstruction era Southern narratives about black criminality, they usually are something to the effect of what was depicted in Birth of a Nation, the original Birth of a Nation. Basically, this idea that black people were going to use their liberation as a means to either through attaining political power or literally physically attacking their ex-masters, their ex-slave owners. They were going to, take revenge for the horrors of slavery. And what we have here with this white genocide narrative in South Africa is basically the same fears and manufactured stories of white victimhood being repeated and passion played. It seems to me that in post-apartheid states, instead of accepting responsibility for what white people did, it is more convenient to shift the imagination of the white public away from white guilt in the past to black crimes in the future, using muddled and messy statistics about black on white crime, extrapolating into a future where blacks annihilate whites as revenge for apartheid. It's been hundreds of years in the United States of America, and white genocide, the white genocide that was forecast for America, never came. The slave insurrections during our apartheid era, during the chattel slave era in the United States of America, never came. Slaves were punished for slave insurrections that generally were very, very rare. And these punishments were always, cruelty towards slaves was always cited as insurance against insurrection. So if we weren't, it's this idea that white slave owners would pass off on a frightened populace, that if they were not allowed to be brutal enough with slaves, those slaves would get the idea of revolting against their masters and going out into white homes and raping and murdering white women. These white genocide narratives have always been premised on the idea of an erect black penis entering your house and your wife and your family at night without permission. It's always very sexualized. You'll also find a lot of the Western genocide narratives about Muslims. It's about predatory brown penises that are going to violate the sanctity of your white daughter's virgin flower. So I always try to push back very hard and give people tools I'll put some links in the description for where I got my information from, but give people tools to talk back to these narratives of white victimhood. And in this particular case, a lot of right-wing news outlets are doing their whole propositional storytelling of why isn't the media, why aren't the South African police, why isn't the UN, why isn't fill in the blank organization talking about the white genocide in South Africa. There is no white genocide in South Africa. There is a epidemic of crime. There is a problem with a privatized police department not doing the kind of diligence that a civil police department would do. When you privatize public services, I remember having a talk about privatization when the free market fundamentalists were raging within the Tea Party movement. When you privatize public services like firefighters, for example, a firefighter working for a privatized fire department has no incentive to put out a fire in a house that has not paid up, whatever fees they were supposed to pay up to a private company in order to get service. So South Africa is learning that police force that is subcontracted to private companies is not going to have incentive to provide protection for all civilians equally. So that's a mitigating factor here, that since the fall of apartheid, there has been a mass liberalization of the South African economy. And this was done because in order to keep whites in power, when white power is no longer enforced by law and government oversight, you will automatically see white power brokers shift into libertarianism and liberalization, meaning that what they used to be empowered by under an apartheid government now is going to be empowered by the fact that they have all the money from the apartheid era, and they're going to buy back the rights that used to be enforced by law will now be enforced by capital. That happened in the United States of America, and that's why the white Southern strategy is very much so premised in a libertarianism that retains white social privilege through economic policy. Since they can't do it by force of law, they're going to do it by, well, we have all this money stacked up from when black people weren't allowed to be paid for their labor, and now we're going to just buy up the white privilege that we used to get from the government. We're just going to get it from economic privilege. And the grievance then comes from the quarters of the white working class is that, I used to have privilege under the government just because of the color of my skin, and now that privilege is based on money. A lot of these regressive movements a lot of these regressive white nationalist movements are based on restoring white social privilege, because when privilege is economic, it may skew white, but it's not universally white. So every time that I used to hear the Tea Party or any of those white libertarian groups like the Cato Institute talking about privilege, it always used to be interesting to see them be at cross ends, with one component using the principles of libertarianism to defend economic privilege, and then the other branch of the same movement using contradicting libertarianism in order to reestablish by law some kind of universal white privilege for poor whites. How is this relevant to South Africa? South Africa's crime problem is like America's crime problem. It may appear on the surface that because in some way in South Africa whites may be statistically more likely to be on the receiving end of these farm crimes. You also have to take into account that because of apartheid, the majority of farm owners are probably going to be white. So, if you play with the statistics and don't dig any deeper, you'll go, step one is that there's an epidemic of farm murders. Step two is that the majority of those farm murders are committed by blacks against whites. You insert the sentiment, but outside of the sentiment, when you dig just one layer deeper on statistics, you will see that it's poor blacks attacking landed whites. Landed meaning people that have inherited property from the ancestral apartheid system. That is not a coincidence, and it's easy to produce a white genocide narrative ahistorically. The most important things that I want you to understand are, number one, farm murders did spike after the end of apartheid. That was because of the economic liberalization and the mass poverty that disproportionately impacted black South Africans, because they were already poor from apartheid. Since there can be no economic redistribution to attain any form of equality in a liberalized capitalist economy, the crime is an epidemic of the poor, not of the black, not of the Mexican or the Arab. I think that these white genocide narratives push for an evaluation of immediate statistics, because absent of history, everything looks like it can be explained by what's happening in the present, which is not the case. The crime in post-apartheid South Africa is about inequality. The majority of these cases, as they've gone through the docket, the statistics actually, you just have to dig one or two layers deeper, and you will find that one of the main mitigating factors is that the victims are elderly and living in remote areas. So those are areas that private police don't have a lot of incentive to protect. And then looking a little further, you have to remember that these crimes are about robbery. The motives are always robbery, and it's happening to black farmers too. It's just there's less black farmers because there's been less redistribution. So what's the solution here again? The solution to these farm murders is to distribute wealth more evenly so that desperation doesn't lead to crime.